We are now excited to welcome our first keynote speaker of the weekend, Monique Trusclair Maddox, who is the Father Charles Curry Memorial Keynote. When Jesuit Father Charlie Curry passed away in 2019 at the age of 88, the Ignatian family lost a giant. Following the horrific murders of six of his fellow Jesuits, their housekeeper, and her daughter, on November 16, 1989, Father Curry was tasked with coordinating Georgetown University's response to the murders, including serving as a liaison to the U.S. congressional investigation that would evolve over the next few years. Father Curry took great risk to uncover the truth of Salvadoran and U.S. government complicity in the deaths of the Uca martyrs. In 1997, he joined with Bob Holstein, a former Jesuit who was deeply moved by the Uca murders, to mobilize the network of Jesuit institutions to call attention to the role of the U.S. funding and military training that led to the martyrs' killing. This gathering of Jesuit school delegations would become known as the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice.
Father Curry played an integral role in developing ISN as an organization to connect Jesuit institutions throughout the U.S. He became one of ISN's founding board members and advocated to ensure that the value of ISN was understood throughout the Jesuit network and larger church. We would not be in this room tonight if it were not for Father Curry. To honor Father Curry's legacy, we have designated our first keynote of the teach-in as the Father Charlie Curry Memorial Keynote. And now to our wonderful speaker, Monique Trusclair Maddox.
Monique Trusclair Maddox is the CEO and chair of the board of directors of the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. She is a fifth and sixth generation granddaughter of Isaac Hawkins and a fourth generation granddaughter of Nace Butler, two of the 272 men, women, and children who were enslaved by the Maryland Jesuits and eventually sold in 1838 in an effort to save Georgetown University from financial ruin. Monique retired from Carlson Wagonlit Travel in 2015 to found Macrame Technologies. She is active in the angel investment community, a native of Maringouin, Louisiana. She holds a BS in electrical engineering from Prairie View A&M University. She serves as a trustee of the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Trust, a board member of the Catholic Community Foundation of Minnesota, and is an active member of Our Lady of Grace Church in Edina, Minnesota. Please welcome to the stage Monique Trusclair Maddox.
Hello. I am grateful to be here this evening to hold space on the main stage at the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. This is my first teach-in, so if you're also attending for the first time, let's find our way together. I am Monique Trusclair Maddox. I was raised in the Deep South in Iberville Parish, Maringouin, Louisiana, to be exact, taking my first sacraments in Immaculate Heart of Mary Catholic Church. I currently live in Edina, Minnesota, which is in the Midwest Jesuit province. I have remained active in my church and Catholic community, faithfully attending Mass at Our Lady of Grace Catholic Church, where I served as trustee of the corporation for the past 6.5 years, and where my husband Roderick and I have served as a marriage mentor couple and as lay contributors to the formation of diocesan priests. I hold leadership positions on several other boards, as has been mentioned, including the GU 272 Descendants Association, where I serve as vice president at large. I am the incoming chair of the Finance Committee on the board of the Catholic Community Foundation of Minnesota, which is entrusted with shepherding more than $500 million in assets, and the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Trust, and the foundation, where I serve as board chair and CEO. Most recently, I joined the advisory board of the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing. My husband, Roderick, and I have one daughter, Simone, who is currently a PhD candidate in ecology, evolution, and behavior in the College of Biological Sciences at the University of Minnesota. Also living with us is my mother, Doris Butler Trusclair, who laid the foundation for my faith journey, which included saying her rosaries daily, just as all generations of her family have done. My family is very important to me because we all share a tragic history. While I am from Maringouin, Louisiana, my ancestors came from southern Maryland, where they were enslaved on Jesuit plantations. In 1838, in order to save the Jesuit mission in the United States from financial trials, my ancestors were sold down the river by the very priests who gave them their first sacraments. I am here today to speak truth, a truth which you may find uncomfortable. I'm here to tell a story which carries with it great pain and great shame. I understand if you may have to stop and reflect, if you need time to listen and process, or even step away. I ask that you take care of what you need for your own health. Please know that I am here to share this truth in love. My ancestors showed their love in their heroic survival and willingness to pass on their Catholic faith to our family. I am here to pass on to you their story with the same courage and faith of my ancestors. In his recent book, Jesuits in the United States, A Concise History, Georgetown Jesuit historian Father David Collins writes, "The history of America cannot be told without the history of religion, and the history of American religion cannot be told without the history of Catholicism. And the history of Catholicism in America cannot be told without the history of Jesuits in America." My ancestors, Isaac Hawkins and Nace Butler, which is short for Ignatius, are central to this history. They are as integral to the history of Catholicism in the United States as Father Andrew White, the first Jesuit to settle in Maryland in 1634, and Archbishop John Carroll, the first Catholic archbishop in the United States and founder of Georgetown University. But you will not read about my ancestors in your history books. I did not learn my family's history until 2016 in a New York Times article with a photo of someone from that little town of Maringouin standing in the cemetery where my father is buried. It grabbed my attention with a grip that I could not release. That article held me in bondage. Imagine learning your family history in this way. I almost cannot put into words the feelings that ran through me the moment I learned that my family was owned and sold by my own church. I could not begin to understand how the Jesuit order, which boasts 52 saints and hundreds of blessed, could have held thousands of human beings enslaved across the world. When I accepted Chris Kerr's invitation to speak to you today around the theme Boundless and Beloved, I prayed over the mission of the Ignatian Solidarity Network to network, educate, and form advocates for social justice animated by the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola and the witness of the Jesuit martyrs of El Salvador and their companions. As a Catholic and a Christian, I believe that we're called to advocate for social justice in our church and in our world. I also know that social justice has a past, a present, and a future. We are not bound to the present as if the challenges facing us, our world, are simply in front of us. Just as your network is rooted in the martyrdom of 6 Jesuits, their housekeeper and her daughter in El Salvador 34 years ago, my family and witness are deeply rooted in the lives of my ancestors and the more than 272 souls who were sold by the Jesuits 185 years ago. To be boundless is to let go of any preconceived bias which upholds that we are somehow not responsible for what happened in the past. To be boundless means that until I know the truth about my school or university, I cannot be truly free. To be boundless means that my response to this history is not limited to what we've always known and always done, knowing that I can dare to imagine a new future rooted in truth, healing, and restorative justice. In the gospel, Jesus challenges us to break through all that binds us so that we may see how beloved we are by God. I had to break through some major bonds to come here today. My first feelings when learning my family history were of betrayal, shame, and hurt. I spent countless hours in adoration on my knees before the Blessed Sacrament in my church, pleading to God for grace and understanding. To be boundless often begins by finding ourselves alone before God, begging for grace and wisdom. This is where I found myself, and I suspect that in time, each of you will find yourselves in this place. In August 2017, I attended a liturgy for healing, contrition, and hope on the campus of Georgetown University. At that liturgy, the president of Georgetown University and the president of the Jesuit Conference of the United States and Canada apologized for their historic role in the enslavement and sale of my ancestors and all the many souls once enslaved by the Jesuits in our church. The Jesuit apology reflected on the spirituality of St. Ignatius Loyola. The conference president said to over 100 descendants, St. Ignatius Loyola mandates that each Jesuit pray for the grace to examine his conscience, so that we may feel interior knowledge of his sins, feel the disorder of his actions, and hating these, pray for the grace to correct himself. How do we examine our conscience, both past and present? How do we feel interior knowledge for these historic sins? And how do we correct ourselves, rooted in the spirituality of St. Ignatius Loyola, the evangelical witness of Jesus Christ and his gospel, and the social justice tradition of our Catholic Church? When we find ourselves alone before God, asking the hard questions about life and faith, we have to begin with an account of our own conscience. We have to reflect on how the sins of the past are connected to the sins of today and ask those foundational questions. What have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What will I do for Christ? As many of you know, our church is meeting in Rome this month for the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops. In this first session, they are contemplating the themes of communion, participation, and mission for a synodal church. In this first session of the Synod, they're using a document called the Instrumentum Laboris, Latin for working document. I have been fortunate to meet with some members of the Synod about this document. Dr. Cynthia Bailey Manns, an adult learning director and former spiritual director in my Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, and Father James Martin, a Jesuit author and activist who's familiar with this stage. Together, we have contemplated the central question of the Synod. How does this journeying together allow the Church to proclaim the gospel in accordance with the mission entrusted to her? And what steps does the Spirit invite us to take in order to grow a synodal church? I have prayed specifically over paragraph 23 of the working document, which states, as a church committed to listening, a synodal church desires to be humble and knows that it must ask forgiveness and has much to learn. Some reports note that the synodal path is necessarily a penitential one, recognizing that we have not always lived the constitutional synodal dimension of the ecclesial community. The face of the church today bears the signs of serious crises of mistrust and lack of credibility. I've had to pray over the church's lack of moral credibility when it comes to race and racism. How can the church teach against racism when it has not yet reconciled with its slaveholding past? The church continues to bear signs of mistrust and a lack of credibility on many fronts. Racism is only one of those. Last month, I participated in the National Catholic Conference on Restorative Justice held at the University of St. Thomas School of Law, speaking at a plenary session on the historical harms of racial injustices in the Catholic Church. I remain grateful to the organizers for listening to the survivors of these historic crises, survivors of sexual abuse, surviving generations of Native boarding schools, and descendants of slaveholding. A common thread woven through each of our testimonies was this: listen to the survivors, learn from the descendants, and while discerning, trust us to lead the church to a place of restorative justice and healing. Earlier this year, I read Rachel Swarns' latest book, The 272. It is a story about my family, a people boundless and beloved by God, but beaten and betrayed by the Jesuits in the church. Ms. Swarns' book expanded my understanding of this history and the sale of my ancestors, Isaac Hawkins and Nace Butler. She writes about Father Thomas Mulledy, a former president at Georgetown, and the Jesuit provincial who orchestrated the 1838 sale. Rachel Swarns expanded my knowledge of this sale beyond Georgetown University and the Maryland Jesuits. She wrote, anyone who knew Father Mulledy recognized that his vision extended far beyond one campus. He wanted to do more than revitalize Georgetown. He wanted to build a network of Jesuit colleges. And there was only one way to finance that dream. 4 months later, after he assumed the presidency of Georgetown, he wrote a letter to Jesuit leadership in Rome. Something must be done about the enslaved people on the plantations. My ancestors were those enslaved people, sold to build a network to expand an institution which sadly did not even serve the people enslaved and bartered to fund it. Jesuit and Ignatian pedagogy utilizes context, reflection, and experience in its curriculum, much of which I have shared with you. It also makes a bold call to action. If our learning does not result in change, is it all in vain? As you reflect on this historical context, my family's historic and lived experience, and your own experience of being marginalized in the church and in the world, I offer these call to action questions. How many of you studied this history at your Jesuit or college or Catholic colleges and institutions? If so, did it include descendant voices? If not, why? What do you plan to do with this knowledge now that you've received it? Will my ancestors, Isaac Hawkins and Nace Butler, be written into your history books the same way that Father Andrew White and Archbishop John Carroll are? Will you advocate for them to be included? What will you bring back to your school when you go home? What will you tell your own family what you have learned here? Would you have a novena for reconciliation and conversion of hearts to boldly face this history and the living witnesses who survived it? The prophet Jeremiah once challenged God because he thought he was too young for his voice to count. Jeremiah said, "I do not know how to speak. I am too young." But the Lord said to him, "Do not say I am too young. You must go to everyone I send you to and say whatever I command you." Jeremiah's prophetic voice became a source of peace and justice in his age. Trust that you can do the same in your own time. I want to leave you with one final piece. In a 1962 essay in the New York Times, James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." I thank you for facing this past with me tonight, and I pray that you can be the future change that will make each one of us truly boundless and beloved. Thank you.